From 1938 to 1945, Germany and their allies invaded and nearly annexed all of Europe. The story of how this started and how it progressed is very long and complex. So instead of talking about all of that, let us instead dive deep to take a look at Germany's forgotten first annexation, which was the relatively unknown region of the Saar at the very start of 1935. So if not much more to say, let us begin. The Saar Basin is a hilly region located in modern-day Germany, specifically within the region known as the Rhineland, and for centuries it was most known and used for its large coal deposits. And a little over 100 years before World War I, from 1792 to 1815, it was owned by the French. And then after Napoleon's defeat in 1815, it went to the Prussians. And after another 50 years, pretty much all the French settlers moved back to France, and so the region became fully culturally German. Now we skip 50 years to the end of World War I. On November 11, 1918, the German army, according to the armistice, left their positions and moved to new positions to the right of the Rhine River. The armies of the Entente now moved to occupy all the lands to the left of the Rhine River, or better known as the Rhineland. The French army would then officially control the Saar Basin on December 1, 1918. The French during the war had massive coal repositories in the northeast that were destroyed by the Germans. In fact, half of all French coal production was destroyed, and so during the Paris peace conferences, a special French delegation supported by the French president Georges Clemenceau told the Entente that the French deserved large amounts of coal from Germany. He would get the coal from Germany by annexing the entire Saar Basin, with the justification being that, according to him, the basin had some French traditions. The British and Italian delegation, led by Prime Ministers Lloyd George and Vittorio Orlando, agreed on saying the French deserved coal, but on the rest they took no stance. For the American delegation, President Woodrow Wilson said the French never mentioned the annexation of the Saar as one of their original war goals, so he would not give his support for it, as it would go against his 14 peace points. So Clemenceau stormed out of the meeting. He went to his advisors André Tardieu and Louis Lachaud to come up with a new plan to get the other leaders to agree. They would start by claiming most of the coal in the region was to be given to France, which the other delegations agreed to already. Then they would tell the others that the French army had to make sure the coal deliveries were completed and up to French regulation. This would be done by, in their words, setting aside German sovereignty. This basically would mean they would forcibly occupy the region for its coal, and then they would legally make the region a separate League of Nations mandate. Then France would indirectly own the Saar. So they tried this plan, and it soon failed as Wilson turned it down. In response, the French press immediately antagonized him, claiming he did not recognize their sacrifices, and the French delegation threatened to quit the conference. The infighting within the conference got so bad over the subject of the Saar that Wilson said to the public, "In fact, I do not know whether this peace conference will continue." Lloyd George and Orlando did not take a position, and so upon Wilson's failing health and Charles H. Haskins taking over as the American delegation leader, they worked out a deal so the French would have temporary sovereignty over the Saar. But this came with the terms that there would have to be a plebiscite, which if you don't know what a plebiscite is, it is an election held solely by the public of a region. The plebiscite would have to be held at a later date to choose the status of the basin, and finally all parties agreed to this. The Germans would be then sent the following terms. As compensation for the destruction of the coal mines in France, and part of payment to reparations, Germany cedes in full the possessions of the coal mines in the Saar. The region also has to go under a French mandate for the period of 15 years. And lastly, if the Germans wanted to get back the coal mines, they had to pay in gold to the French. Following this, the French still wanted more. They planned to make residents of the Saar become French citizens in a few years' time, and planned to send French coal miners to the region to force all votes in the Saar to end up in French interest. But worst of all, they pushed for the treaty to require the Germans to buy the mines in 15 years, or they would lose the entire region. The German delegation was furious, calling the terms primitive. The German press was even more angry, calling it a massive injustice. The Germans then sent back another proposal, saying they would guarantee the delivery of coal and offered stock of German mining companies to the French. This proposal was denied, but the Americans changed the terms by making it so the Germans did not have to fully pay back their debt to keep the land. But for now, the conference had bigger issues, now having to deal with the Rhineland as a whole, so the Saar issue was left at that. And so the final agreement came on April 8, 1919, with the French having full control over the coal mines, but the Saar region had to be officially run by the League of Nations as the territory of the Saar Basin for 15 years. The next year, on January 10, 1920, the Treaty of Versailles was put into force, and with that, the Saar territory was official. Its government was to be a five-man commission run by the League of Nations. One man had to be chosen by the French government, one man had to be chosen by the German government, and the rest had to be chosen by the League of Nations. And between, the five men would choose one as the official president of the territory. Below them was the Regional Council, a parliament with 30 seats, and this would be the political core of the territory. The first regional council election occurred on June 25, 1922, with the German Center Party winning the most seats with 16 out of 30. They would be the most prominent political party in the Tsar for the next decade, and the closest runner-ups were the Communist Party and the Social Democrat Party. For the next decade, not much would happen within the Tsar. The rural occupation crisis from 1923 to 1925 made the French army even more hated by the German populace, and in turn would make louder cries for unification with Germany. During this time, the French franc was forced as the only official currency in the region, and in June 1930, the Allied troops would leave the Rhineland, but the Saar Basin would remain under French occupation. So now for the German populace in the Tsar, they saw the French as complete oppressors, and the most extreme feeling that the French army were now masters of their homeland. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany, and his party would also get 2 seats in the regional council. During this time, some of those who feared Hitler's regime fled to the Tsar and attempted to call on the League of Nations not to hold the plebiscite. 7 months later, on July 5th, the Central Party, which dominated Tsar politics, was dissolved under Hitler's orders. Now with a void in the regional council and 6 months till the plebiscite to end the 15-year occupation, Hitler acted quickly. His first move was to unite all of the Tsar political parties that were aligned to him into one, called the German Front. The sole goal of this front was to only push for unification with Nazi Germany. On the other side were the previously mentioned Social Democrat Party and the Communist Party. They joined a front together in July 1934 called the Saarland Unity Front, in which they would be led by a former member of the Central Party named Johannes Hoffmann. Soon after the two sides being formed, the League took notice of the growing political tensions and tried to mediate order between both sides in the public. But Hitler would go fully into propaganda. The German propaganda ministry put up over 10,000 posters in the region and held over 1,000 meetings with the public about reunification. The Unity Front, on the other hand, did not have a single unified talking point, and so their messages went unheard. By late 1934, Hitler resorted to violence. Social Democrats and Communists were beaten in the streets, and meetings were stormed and broken up by men wearing Nazi armbands. Covert SS and Gestapo units were sent to the region, and during all of this, the police were paid off and turned a blind eye. By November 1934, the French who technically ran the region showed no sign of caring about the growing political violence. However, Hitler didn't know this for sure, and at the time he actually feared a war with France. So he toned down his political efforts and told his men in the region, led by Josef Berkel, to stop the violence for now, and not to use any Nazi armbands till the end of February 1935. A month later, on December 8th, the plebiscite for or against reunification was now a month away, so the League of Nations sent in troops to keep the peace and to make sure the vote was conducted fairly. It was mostly a British and Italian force, with some Dutch and Swedish troops, and at the end of the month, Hitler secretly sent 47,000 people who formerly lived in the Tsar back into the region to make sure the vote would be for reunification. Finally, on January 13th, 1935, the plebiscite was held. The votes were transported by League of Nations troops and were counted by a League-appointed council. The results were released 4 days later, and as expected, 470,000 people, nearly 91% of the voters, voted for reunification with Nazi Germany. And as a result, Johannes Hoffmann and thousands of other Social Democrats and Communists fled to Paris. And so over the next month and a half, the troops sent to keep order went home, and officially on March 1st, 1935, the land was given back to Germany. As this was Hitler's first land grab, he held a massive celebration in the Saar, and would visit the capital Saarbrücken a week later on March 7th. 10 days later, on March 17th, Hitler would use his political victory in the Saar to announce to the world the rearmament and conscription of the German army. 2 months later, on May 21st, 1935, he would exclaim to the world that Germany is for peace. He would say, "Germany has recognized and guaranteed France's frontiers as determined after the Saar plebiscite. We hereby renounce all claims to Alsace-Lorraine." For the years after, not much would change in the Saar. It was still just a source of coal. All of the hype from the German press was just hype with not much to show. The world would forget about this small region as Hitler remilitarized and claimed more land in Austria and Czechoslovakia. And the people of the Saar would go on about life normally till what would be the only successful invasion by the French in September 1939. But that's a story for a later time. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you're new and want more videos like this, like and subscribe, and leave a comment about what you would want next. Have a good day, and goodbye.